Thank you guys for joining the webinar. Today we're going to be talking about simplifying e-commerce scraping operations. Now, as many of you know, e-commerce and web scraping in general is complicated. We need a lot of data, sorry. And a lot of people think that just because all this data is publicly available, it should be easy to grab. But as you're going to see in this presentation, it can be more difficult than it seems. And I want to present to you a few different solutions that can really simplify this operation, especially from the developer perspective, right? Which I think a lot of you are. You're the ones who actually need to go collect that data. How can we do that in the easiest way possible and let you do what you're good at, right? Which is writing code and collecting data, not trying to get past all these blocks and all the issues you're going to see that we'll talk about. So before I get into the whole presentation, I'll just give you a quick introduction to myself. My name is Tim Ruscica. I'm a software engineer. I've been a software engineer now for almost 10 years. I started coding when I was about 12 years old, and I have a large YouTube channel that has about 1.5 million subscribers. I'm sure that's how many of you are familiar with me. I've worked with Bright Data for a few years now. I've done all kinds of different projects with them. I was actually in Vegas with them just about a week ago, doing some presentations there as well. And I have some videos on my channel where I talk about specifically Bright Data products and how you use them in various web scraping projects. You can see some here, and I'll actually show you some projects that I've worked on later in the video in terms of how you use these solutions and build out full applications. So let's start with the first thing and kind of build some context here. When you want to actually scrape web data and collect this data from the internet, there's a lot of barriers you're going to run into, and I'm pretty sure most of you, if you've ever attempted to do this, have probably seen these barriers. Even if you're just scraping some basic data or just trying to interact with a website, chances are one of the things on screen here is something that you've encountered. So I'll just quickly go through them. First, dynamic content. So as we know, websites are constantly changing. Maybe there's a banner that pops up. They change the format. They change the way data is rendered, sorry. And if you want to capture something in real time, obviously, that's a huge issue. Next, anti-scraping technology. Probably one of the largest things you're going to face. Websites don't want you to access their data. Big companies like Amazon, Wayfair, all these e-commerce sites, data really is their whole business. And obviously, they don't want you to have access to all of it. So they have all these advanced mechanisms to avoid you actually accessing and scraping this data. Next, CAPTCHAs. We've all seen these before. I actually just posted one on my Instagram story the other day that was like extremely complicated that I could hardly solve. So you can imagine as a bot, how do you actually get past all of these CAPTCHAs and advance to the website? Next, JavaScript heavy websites. A lot of websites have a lot of JavaScript. For example, if we have a React website or something like that, and we need a way to actually render that JavaScript and get the dynamic content that's being generated on the page. Lastly, rate limiting and IP blocks. Now, this is something that as a developer, you don't really have much control over, and that's really difficult to overcome, especially if you're doing this from your local computer. Sometimes if you try to access a website a bunch of times, it's going to ban your IP address and it's going to rate limit you. You can only access the site every 20 seconds, 30 seconds, minute. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. So let's just look at this slide here, some images. I'm sure maybe bringing back some PTSD for some of you. And these are images that I've encountered many times. I'm trying to scrape a website. All of a sudden, I see a CAPTCHA. I get some error saying I can't reach the site, even though it was working 20 seconds ago. My IP address is banned, and I'm just completely blocked. I'm really pushed out, and I can't access the data that I want, especially if you're doing this from your local computer, if you're trying to just do it in a development environment. A very frustrating error to encounter. And as it says here, really a nightmare when you're just trying to get a project done, especially if you have a deadline or you have your boss telling you, hey, go collect this data as quickly as possible. And then you run into these errors. What do you do? So what I want to do now is just show you a quick demo of some of the challenges that you've probably faced or that you will face if you're trying to scrape a lot of web data. So we'll run this video. And what you see here is Wayfair, now a popular e-commerce site. And let's say we want to scrape all the different beds on Wayfair. So we have 39,000 results. What we want to do is collect the information that's kind of in this frame. So we want the price, we want maybe the image, we want the name of it. And I'll show you a quick code sample of how we would do that. So keep in mind, this is before we're using Bright Data, and this is just if you're going to do this locally on your own computer. So what you'll see here is that we're going to try to scrape 30 pages of data. Now, it's not super important, but I want you to understand that this really is not a lot of data. And I want you to see what happens when I try to do this from my local computer. You don't need to worry too much about the code. Just understand we're scraping 30 pages. So what I'm going to do is run my script here, and you'll see that it's going to load up the browser window. We'll wait for it to load. We'll grab kind of the first page of results. And then once that's finished, we'll move on to the next page. So you can see it took about 11 seconds to do that. Now we're going to speed it up to 10 times speed because obviously this is going to take a long time. And as we go through here, you'll see what starts to happen. So we're scraping the sites, takes about 10, 11 seconds per page that we're scraping. And then eventually we're going to start hitting CAPTCHAs. Now, this is because we've been rate limited. We can't access the site anymore. It's detected us as a bot. And that was after only scraping about 10 pages. Now, in this case, we're just waiting for one page to load. Once it loads, we scrape the next one. But again, you can see that we run into CAPTCHAs. Half the data we wanted to collect, we couldn't even collect. And this took us 269 seconds just to scrape about 30 pages. Obviously, that's really infeasible if we wanted to scale up to do 250 pages, 300 pages, tens of thousands of pages. And this is an issue you've probably ran into locally where you want to scrape a bunch of data, you go to all these different pages, and then you're getting blocked, right? CAPTCHAs start popping up. You're just not even collecting the data you want because the website's detecting you as a bot. So let's just go to the next slide here. So some of you who are developers may be asking, okay, well, why don't we just scale vertically and horizontally? In that instance, it took a long time because I was waiting for one page to load before I collected the next page. Now, a lot of you know we don't have to do that. We can actually load a bunch of pages at once. That would be vertical scaling, where we just increase the compute power in our machine and we load more and more pages pretty much at the same time. Or alternatively, we can scale horizontally, where we add more machines and we have maybe 100 computers that are working on this task at once. Now, I want to show you an example of why that doesn't actually work with this demo right here. So this is an example of vertical scaling. What I'm going to do in this example with this code snippet here is I'm now going to try to load as many pages as I can at the same time. So I'm going to do this asynchronously now rather than waiting for one page to load. I'm just going to load as many as I can on my computer. I have a pretty powerful machine here, and you're going to see what happens. So same thing, we're going to try to do 30 pages. Again, this time we'll do it asynchronously. Let's have a quick look at what happens when we actually do that. Okay, so we run the code. You see that what's really going to happen in the background here is we're going to load up all these different windows, about 30 of them, and you'll see what's going to happen when I actually attempt to do that. Notice that almost every single page here is being blocked by a CAPTCHA. Now that's because, of course, we've been detected as a bot. We can't just spam the website 30 times in 2 or 3 seconds. It's going to block us out. It's not going to allow us to collect that data. And you'll see here that we actually didn't get any of the results that we wanted. So this was even a worse solution than what we saw previously, where we were waiting for a page to load, waiting a few seconds, getting the next page, etc. So that's kind of the issue, and what you guys are probably going to encounter when you try to do this locally. You're going to get blocked, and if you do try to scale it up vertically, you're going to get blocked even faster because you're hitting the website quicker. So let's move on to the next page. Okay, so that brings me to what do we actually need to scale? I mean, those are all the issues. Those are things you've probably encountered, and I know that I've encountered many times. How do we get by this? Well, the first thing that we need is infrastructure. So as you saw, we're going to have a bunch of CAPTCHAs. We need a way to unblock that, get past the CAPTCHAs. And then we also need proxy server management. So in this case, I'm just doing it from my local computer, from my IP address, wherever I am in the world. But maybe I want to access a site from Australia or Canada or the US, or I want to compare prices in different regions. We need a proxy network that allows us to do that. We also need the proxy network so we can change our IP address whenever we get blocked so we can still access the website. Now, beyond that, we need to actually develop the scraper. So once we have the infrastructure, okay, we have the tools we need to scrape, we have to now go build the scraper, right? So we need some expertise in that. We need to maintain our code. This can be time consuming. We have got to create the schema. And then once we do that, we have the infrastructure, we have the scraper, we need to move to production. And as you guys know, production is not simple to move to. There's a lot of things that we need to consider. If the website changes, we're going to need to modify our code. We need to validate that what we're getting is correct. And then we need to handle things like rate limiting and throttling, as you saw here. So now let's go to a quick demo here of how we can solve this using Bright Data. So what you're going to view here is a quick code sample where what we're doing now is just connecting to the Bright Data network rather than using a browser on our local machine. So I know it looks like a slightly different code, but really the only change here is that we're using Bright Data. We're kind of outsourcing the browser. So all the operations are going to be the exact same, but in this case, rather than doing it on our local computer, we push it over to the Bright Data network. We let them spin up the different browsers, handle the unblocking, etc. So now you'll see this is what happens when we scrape 30 pages, running in 3 times speed. Give this a second to complete here, and you'll see that we're able to actually collect all of this data in 44 seconds. Okay, so that's great, but now let's scale it up to 250 pages just so we can see the difference in time. Same thing, we're not getting blocked by CAPTCHAs. It's not giving us the data that we need. We're able to actually access it, again, running in 3 times speed. And you'll see here that it spits out the total time in just 1 second was 95 seconds for 250 pages. Now, obviously a slight increase from 30 pages. That's just because there is a little overhead when it comes to actually spinning up the different browsers. But you can imagine if we go up to 1,000 pages, it's not going to be exponentially longer. It's a feasible amount of time. If we want to scrape millions of pages, we can do that. We're not going to get blocked, and we're not going to be dealing with, years to actually grab all of this data if we were to do it locally and have to wait and deal with all that rate limiting, throttling, etc. Okay, so that's just a quick demo of using Bright Data. So now that we've done that, let's talk about the actual tools that we can use to scale. So we have three main tools I'm going to present to you throughout the rest of the presentation. That's the Web Unlocker, the Scraping Browser, and then the Web Scraper IDE. Now, these kind of go in order of lowest level to highest level. So the Web Unlocker, most control, most flexible. And then as you move up, we get into higher level products that are easier to use. Okay, so let's continue here. All right, so Web Unlocker. So the Web Unlocker has a bunch of different features. It's actually what I was using previously. This contains browser fingerprinting, CAPTCHA solving. It will automatically retry and rotate your IP address, does JavaScript rendering. You guys can read through all the points here, but the idea is that this is something that's provided by Bright Data. And again, rather than using our browser locally, we push out to this. It handles all the unblocking, all the unlocking. It just makes our life as a developer much easier. So let's talk about how this works, though. This is actually a headless browser. Now, a headless browser does not include a graphical user interface. What that really means for our case is that it can be more efficient for data collection, and we can spin them up a lot faster. So with the headless browser, we can create as many instances of this as we need. So if we want to scale and get 100,000 pages, we can create 100,000 headless browsers, or in this case, the Web Unlocker. So these are really good for quickly scaling. Again, the difference is we don't actually have that graphical user interface. So any advanced interactions we need to do with the page, we wouldn't be able to do with this tool, but that's where the next one will come in. Now, as well as the headless browser, the Web Unlocker, we have the CAPTCHA solver. Now, this is built into all the different Bright Data products. So the Web Unlocker, the scraping browser, the different ones we're going to talk about. But I just wanted to have a slide here because this is pretty cool and something that I think a lot of you will see value in right away. So when we reach a website, we're going to probably have a CAPTCHA on that site, or it's possible that we do have a CAPTCHA. Now, what we would need to do as a developer is, first of all, detect, do we have a CAPTCHA? Okay, if we have one, now we got to figure out what type of CAPTCHA it is. Then we need to automatically solve it. If it fails, we need to retry it. There's actually a lot that goes into solving CAPTCHAs. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't know how I would write my own CAPTCHA solver, especially one that could handle tons of different types of CAPTCHAs. So Bright Data provides one of these for us, again, built into all of the different tools. It can automatically detect if the CAPTCHA exists, what type of CAPTCHA it is, and then solve it for us. It works for all the major types of CAPTCHAs like reCAPTCHA, HCAPTCHA, etc. And what it can do is use user emulation and fingerprint management to avoid almost all of the CAPTCHAs that you're going to encounter. Okay, so now we move on to the next product. This is kind of a level up from that Web Unlocker, and this is the scraping browser. Now, this is the one that I find myself using most. And what this is a 3-in-1 website unblocking solution. So just like the Web Unlocker, it contains the, CAPTCHA solver, that proxy management technology, so it can rotate the IP address for us. It will automatically unblock the websites. But this time we actually add some browser functions. So this means that we can actually perform operations in the browser. We can click into elements. We can navigate to different links. We can do what a normal human would do when they're actually browsing a website and again, clicking through some site. Now, the great thing about this is that we can control this scraping browser using frameworks and technology we already know and understand. So for example, it works with Puppeteer, Playwright, and Selenium, and we can easily integrate this into our existing code. So what you saw in the previous examples was my code didn't really change. All I did was, all I did was use the scraping browser, which is provided by Bright Data, rather than using a browser on my local computer. Now, that's why I quite like this, because I don't need to learn a whole new technology. I just keep using Puppeteer, Playwright, Selenium, whatever one I prefer, and now I just kind of inject the scraping browser, and I control that rather than controlling my own local browser, which is going to suffer all those issues you saw before where we get blocked, CAPTCHAs, etc. Okay. So let's have a quick demo of why we would actually need the scraping browser. Now, in a lot of different sites, we need to do some more advanced interactions with them. We need to click into different pages. Again, we need to navigate links. Maybe we need to render some specific content. And it requires that we control the browser, right? Like we move the mouse around, we click into something, we enter some keys. You guys can probably think of some examples, but I want to show you a really good one here with the Nike website. So on Nike, we have like these custom shoes. I'm not a big sneakerhead, maybe some of you are, but the point is with these shoes, you can click on this customize button. And it brings you this whole like builder for the shoes where you can change the different color, you can change the style. And for something like this, it's not a URL that you can go to. Like I can't go to a URL that contains all the different customizations I've made for this shoe. I need to actually use the page state and keep updating it and changing it. This is an example of when you would need the scraping browser. So first of all, like a pop-up comes up. Immediately, I got to click out of that pop-up. What you're watching now is the scraping browser do this automatically. So I've written some code in the background that's running that will detect the pop-up, clicks on the skip button, and then you'll see that it kind of shows the shoe, a bunch of colors pop up, and it will go and select all the different colors and kind of move through the phases, right? So you can see it's changing the color of the shoe. It's just making everything gray, nice and simple. Again, just an example of when we would need the scraping browser, right? We go to a site, there's some interaction we need to perform. We do that interaction. Well, in order to do that, we need a tool like the scraping browser that has that full head full ability. Okay, so let's get out of that. And now let's move on to the next product, which is the Web Scraper IDE. So we had the Web Unlocker, which is kind of our lowest level headless browser. We had the scraping browser, which is a level up where we can actually do those page interactions. And now we have the Web Scraper IDE. Now, this is something provided by Bright Data that is really a full-scale IDE designed specifically for web scraping. Now, I'll show you a demo in a second, but this contains really all of the same features that we've seen before. So it has that CAPTCHA solver, it has the unblocking technology, it has the proxy network, it's a full headful browser, so we have that graphical user interface. But another advantage of this is that it actually provides a higher level framework which contains some browser functions for interacting with the site. So a lot of times you need to do common things like waiting for an element to appear before you click on it. You need to maybe scroll to the bottom of the page. In this case, you don't need to write that code yourself. There's actually JavaScript snippets and kind of boilerplate code that's provided for you. So it makes it really fast to scrape quite a few different sites. And another advantage of this is it has some serverless features. So let's just move on to the next slide here where I talk about that. So what you can do with this IDE is you can build a scraper that will be hosted by Bright Data. So you go, you build it in the Web Scraper IDE. Once you're finished, it's just living there in the Bright Data network, and then you can trigger this scraper to run either manually or using an API call. So rather than handling all of the maintenance, all of the hosting, all of the logging, debugging, whatever, it's provided exactly, or provided, sorry, for you by Bright Data. So now you already have something that's hosted. You can trigger it from an API, you can connect it to your front end, and then you can customize your delivery method. So if you want it via a webhook, Amazon S3, Azure, doesn't matter. You can go and you can change that. And again, it's really nice because now you just have something that's already hosted. It's provided for you. You press a button, you make an API call, and then you get the results that you need. You don't need to worry about hosting that. Again, just kind of a nice, easy solution for you there. So let's look at the Web Scraper IDE in action. This is me just kind of navigating through the tool. So this is what it looks like. You can just go to it in your browser, and you'll see that on the left-hand side, we have our interaction code, and then on the right-hand side, we actually have a live preview. Now, I believe I run that preview in 1 second, so you can see what it looks like, but it's nice because you can view exactly what you're doing in one step, and then at the bottom of the page here, you have some different inputs that you can pass in and you can kind of test with. Again, we'll look at some more features here, but let's go one step at a time. So when I run the preview here, obviously it's going to run the code. We have some breakpoints. We can go through it line by line, and we can see exactly what our code is doing in real time and then get all of the output here. So this is actually what it generated for us. It can parse through that output. And then here, let me just pause this. This is where we're getting these, what do you call it, pre-built functions, right? So you can see we have rerun stage, next stage, wait visible, wait hidden, freeze page, click, click at. All these functions that you've probably written yourself when you're working with a framework like Selenium are just provided for you automatically here in the Web Scraper IDE. So it makes it really fast to actually go and build these different web scrapers without reinventing the wheel. There's some more documentation, obviously, you can look at. And then we have the ability to run this collector manually. As I said, we kind of get that serverless function-like feel where it's hosted in the cloud for us. We can run it, we can view the logs, we can view the success rate. And then if we want, we can also trigger it by an API. So I believe that's the next page that we're going to go to here. Give this a second. So we can initiate manually, sorry, by passing in some inputs. And then we have the API code. So it just gives us a sample of how we do this from Bash. But of course, we could just wrap this into some kind of Python call, JavaScript request, whatever we want. I'm sure you guys can figure out how to do that. And then lastly, we have a bunch of settings here. So again, we can run this like every week, every day. We can get the results back by email, by a webhook. We can really customize it to whatever we need. Again, just quite a useful feature and really kind of avoids a lot of the maintenance that you would typically need to do if you wanted to build your own web scraper. You need to attach it to some server, you need to get some kind of request. We no longer need to do that. We can just use it directly here from Bright Data. All right, so now what I want to do is get into a tool that I built myself. So this is a project that I posted on YouTube. I'll show you the video link for it in the code in just a second. But this is something that's going to go and pretty much compare prices on a website. So in this case, we are using Newegg, and let's just run the quick demo. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see that we have a bunch of different products that I've actually scraped previously. I'm kind of a computer nerd. I like computer tech. So here we have Ryzen 9 3900X, computer monitor, RTX 4080, etc. And if I click into one of these, it will give me this nice tabulated list of all of the different products that I've scraped from Newegg, their current price, and then a change in that price. So it'll say when I scraped it, what the name is, and then I can click into one of these products, and you'll see that we get the full description, we get the URL, we get the source, we get the image for it, and then a chart that actually shows the change in price. So what I did is I scraped this over a few days, and you can see that for a product like this, the price actually changed pretty drastically. I was surprised how much this changed in just a few days. And you can see we've gone from 1,800 up to 2,400, down, up, etc. So even as a consumer, if I'm not trying to compete on price as a business, it's still a really useful thing to know. And I was pretty surprised how much these prices actually change. So it shows the current price as well. Now, what we can do is we can obviously scrape a new product. So what I do here is I just type in DDR5 RAM. Okay, and I want to show you what actually happens in the back end when I do this. So obviously we're viewing the front end, and now we're moving on to the back end. So I sent that request, and you'll see what's happened here is we get that request. It says post start scraper. And in the back end, what happens is we connect to the scraping browser. So that's what it's doing, connecting the browser, connected. And then I've just printed out all of the steps so you can see what I'm actually doing to collect this data. So first, I load the initial page. Then Bright Data is going to detect, okay, is there a CAPTCHA? So it says solving and detecting CAPTCHA. In this case, there was no CAPTCHA, so we were lucky. We were able to get by there. Then we're actually going to search DDR5 RAM on newegg.com. So we actually go to that search bar, type it in. As you can see, entering text in the search field, pressing the search button. Then we load the page content. We retrieve all of the products that are on the results page. We wait a second, and then you can see it shows us all of the products. So in this case, we located 31 products that matched that name filter, and then we save all of the results, and we send it back to the front end so we can view it in a nice table. So let's go back to the front end here and view this, and you can see now we're getting the results for DDR5 RAM. Okay, and if we click into one of them, which I believe I do, give this a second, you can see the image, and you can see the price change for this RAM. So just an interesting tool. And the idea behind me even showing this to you is that this is what I built as a solo developer. This took me a day or so. I mean, I built it in my basement, was doing it on my local computer. And the only reason I was able to actually build something like this out is because I had access to these tools from Bright Data. So now imagine you're an entire development team, you're working on this for weeks or months. What kind of tools would you be able to build if you weren't just a single developer kind of doing this as a hobby project? It's really just a proof of concept and to illustrate to you how powerful this is and how easily you can scale using these tools. Great. So that's that demo. Now, if you guys are interested in learning more about this, you can actually check out the code. It's all open source. I have it on GitHub, and I have a whole video that performed quite well on YouTube that actually talks about this project specifically, kind of walks through how it operates, shows you some more examples, and that's called Web Scraping 101, $1 million project idea. Just look it up on YouTube. You'll be able to find it. You can even just type it on Google. And then this code here, you can go just to price tracking web scraper on my GitHub, which is simply Tech with Tim. Okay. So lastly, let's talk about kind of what this means for you and in-house scraping versus using Bright Data. So let's imagine you didn't know anything that I just told you in this presentation, and you wanted to actually scale web scraping in-house. Well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, there's a bunch of different features or functions that you're going to need to implement. First of all, maintaining complex infrastructure, right? You're going to need to maintain servers, proxy networks, etc. I mean, as you guys know, that's a full-time role, or at least a major part of someone's role. And that could cost a company $80,000 to $100,000 a year. I mean, really, one developer is going to be dedicated to maintaining all of that infrastructure, maybe even more, depending on how much infrastructure you have. Next, manual IP address rotation, something pretty complicated that you don't really want to be dealing with on your own. This requires a dedicated development team or the use of third-party services. Next, conditional rendering. We need to develop this from scratch. That'd be days of work for a developer, advanced error handling, logging, etc. And then we move on to things like fingerprint spoofing and senior development experience, which I think is the most significant on this list. So doing web scraping, as you've seen here, if you don't have access to these tools, this is not a beginner level project. This isn't something that a junior developer off the street can just go build in a few days. You really do need to be an advanced developer. You need to have the ability to spin up servers, maintain infrastructure, rotate IP addresses, do all of the advanced scraping, push it to production. That's a senior developer type role. That's going to cost you a lot of money as a company and really just makes the barrier to entry super high. Now, obviously, if we compare that to Bright Data, all of these things are handled for you. You can do all of these instantly. And now a junior developer or an intern, sorry, with access to these tools can actually go and build out a web scraper that can scale and collect the data that you need. Now, one of the important things I like to highlight here is that with these tools, it also allows you to experiment really quickly. Before, what that would mean is if you want to build out a web scraper, this is a full big project. It's going to take weeks. You're going to need multiple developers. With Bright Data, if my boss comes to me and says, hey, can you scrape a little bit of data here? I just want to look at it, mess around with it. It's not a huge deal anymore. Sure, it will take me a bit of time, but I can do this in a day or in an afternoon because I have access to these tools that let me scale up really, really quickly without that advanced knowledge. So that's what I really like doing, and it lets me build out projects like the one you just saw quite quickly because the tools are already built for me.